On October 14, 1943, southern Germany, thin autumn light filters through high-altitude clouds as hundreds of American bombers push toward their target. At 15,000 feet, the sky is deceptively calm. For Major Karl Fischer, a seasoned Luftwaffe fighter ace, this is familiar terrain. He leans over his worn logbook, pencil scratching a short note, 17th Fortress down. Through the canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, he watches another B-17 spiral earthward trailing black smoke, engines coughing like dying beasts. Tiny specks, parachutes, bloom behind it. Others do not. He adjusts his oxygen mask and scans the bomber stream ahead. The formation looks tight, determined, but he's seen that resolve before. The German fighters strike like hawks from the sun. Brief, surgical, devastating. By the time the American gunners react, the attackers are gone, climbing back into the glare. Below, the first Schweinfurt raid is unraveling. 291 flying fortresses crossed into German airspace that morning, tasked with hammering ball-bearing factories critical to the Nazi war machine. But they came without long-range escort. For the Luftwaffe, it's a hunter's dream. Through scattered contrails, Fischer spots gaps opening in the bomber boxes. Gunfire flashes from the fortresses, streams of .50 caliber rounds stitching empty sky. The German pilots have learned where to strike, nose blind spots, ammunition-starved arcs, or simply by overwhelming the defenders' nerves with coordinated attacks. By midday, the scale of the slaughter becomes clear. 60 B-17 cells will never make it back to England. 17 more will land crippled, written off upon arrival. Hundreds of airmen will be killed or captured before nightfall. The Luftwaffe pilots call it a turkey shoot. The Americans will remember it by another name, Black Thursday, the single bloodiest day in the history of the 8th Air Force. In briefing rooms across England, stunned officers pore over mission reports. The defensive, combat box strategy, designed to let overlapping fields of fire protect bomber formations, has been shredded. In theory, each B-17's 13 guns cover every angle. In practice, German precision and aggression exploit every gap. The arithmetic is brutal. Without escorts, bombers are slow, predictable targets, forced to fly straight and level into a storm of attacks. For the Luftwaffe pilots, the mood is exultant, but analytical. Their tactics have matured into something close to a science. Head-on attacks shatter bomber cockpits before gunners can respond. Massed frontal formations create target overload. And crucially, the Germans control when and where to fight. They can wait just beyond Allied fighter range, hit hard, and disappear. For the American crews who survive, the experience is seared into memory. Frostbitten faces peer from shattered windows as bomb bays close. Gunners slump beside spent ammunition belts. Over the intercom, voices are hoarse, some from oxygen masks, others from fear. They know they are flying home through skies still prowled by experienced German hunters. What neither side fully understands in that moment is that this day marks both a peak and a turning point. For the Luftwaffe, it's proof that the Reich's defenses are working flawlessly. For the Allies, it's a brutal lesson strategic bombing without proper fighter escort is unsustainable. Before the winter ends, a new aircraft will appear over Germany. Fast, agile, and with the range to go the distance. When it does, the hunters will become the hunted. In the autumn skies of 1943, the Luftwaffe is not improvising. It's executing a perfected art form. German fighter leaders have spent months dissecting Allied bombing tactics, finding seams, and sharpening their methods into a lethal formula. Every maneuver, every approach vector has been tested through fire. By this point in the war, intercepting bomber streams isn't guesswork. It's precision engineering with human lives at stake. Major Walter Dahl, One of Germany's most formidable pilots stands before a blackboard at an airbase near Hanover. Chalk diagrams cover the surface, formations, arcs of fire, approach speeds. He addresses younger pilots with clipped confidence. "We don't set waste ammunition. We strike once, where it hurts, and we leave before they can react." Their playbook is clear. Step 1. Exploit the nose. The American B-17's defensive guns leave a critical blind spot dead ahead. Step 2. Attack in numbers. A line-abreast assault forces gunners to divide their fire among too many targets. Step 3. Psychological pressure. Sustained frontal attacks drain nerves and discipline, breaking formations from within. In the cockpit, this doctrine translates to heart-pounding seconds. Pilots like Heinz Nock dive head-on through bomber boxes at over 400 miles per hour, firing 2-second bursts directly into cockpit glass and engines, then peeling away before turret gunners can lock on. One pass, perfectly executed, is enough to tear open the formation. The results speak for themselves. During the Schweinfurt-Regensburg missions earlier that year, nearly 1 in 6 bombers was lost. Gunner reports described fighters materializing out of the sun, streaking forward and vanishing before anyone can shout bearings. In many cases, bombers never saw the attacker who killed them. The Americans rely on their combat box formation, tight, layered groups of 1821 aircraft, designed to weave overlapping fields of fire. On paper, it's brilliant, like a flying fortress wall. In reality, maintaining perfect geometry in turbulence and under fire is nearly impossible. A single damaged aircraft drifting out of position opens a hole, and German pilots are trained to dive straight into it. Beyond tactics, the Luftwaffe wields a subtle but powerful weapon: fear. Veteran German aces time their attacks in waves, letting adrenaline spike and fade, wearing down crews who know another onslaught is minutes away. Gunners burn through ammunition early, often firing at shadows. Pilots watch their instruments fogging from frost, knowing the next pass might bring cannon shells punching through aluminum skin. At airfields across occupied Europe, young German pilots absorb these methods with reverence. They know they're part of a system that, for now, works frighteningly well. Their older comrades have turned bomber interception into a methodical craft, and it gives them confidence bordering on invincibility. But this growing sense of dominance has a hidden consequence. Victories come so easily that many in the Luftwaffe begin to believe their edge is permanent. They don't yet sense the storm gathering across the channel, an innovation that will undermine every assumption they've built their tactics on. For the moment, though, the skies belong to them. Allied bombers that venture deep into Germany without escort are stepping into a trap designed with scientific precision. Every vulnerability has been mapped. Every formation weakness is a target. And the Luftwaffe, still flush with fuel, experienced pilots, and confidence, is ready to exploit them all. Every bombing mission that autumn begins the same way: engines roaring before dawn, air crews climbing into their flying fortresses, and the comforting presence of friendly fighters arcing overhead. But deep inside every pilot's mind lurks the same unspoken dread: the moment when those escorts turn back. American commanders know the problem well. Their fighters are powerful, but tethered by physics. The sturdy P-47 Thunderbolt can outrun most German aircraft and pack a punch, but even with extra fuel tanks, it can barely reach the German border. Beyond that invisible line, the bombers are on their own. Radar operators in German control rooms know exactly where that line is. They call it the golden moment. Once the last Allied fighters peel away, Luftwaffe squadrons lift off from hidden bases, climbing rapidly to intercept the now unprotected bomber streams. It's a ritual, practiced, and deadly. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany SIP's top aces, once described the tactic bluntly: "We waited where their friends had to leave them." The bombers tightened their formations. we tightened our attack. For the bomber crews, the transition is palpable. One moment, the sky feels secure. Silver escort fighters weaving protective patterns. The next, the horizon looks empty. Crews lean against cold glass, scanning for black specks that will soon grow into swarms of fighters. The radios buzz, but beneath the chatter, there's silence, the kind born of shared fear. The Luftwaffe takes full advantage. German fighters attack in waves, then return to base, refuel, and strike again. A single squadron can make multiple sorties against the same bomber formation, harassing it for hours. American bombers, heavy and slow, can't maneuver freely without breaking formation discipline. Each mile deeper into German territory stretches that vulnerability further. Mechanical limitations compound the problem. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning, theoretically capable of longer range, struggles in Europe's high-altitude cold. Engines seize, controls freeze, and pilots often turn back early to avoid disaster. This isn't just a tactical gap, it's a strategic wound. Every deep raid into Germany forces commanders to choose between attacking vital targets and accepting catastrophic losses. Each mission brief ends with the same sobering line. Escort will depart here. Everyone in the room knows what that means. German controllers track bomber streams meticulously. Ground stations relay their course, altitude, and speed. Fighters position themselves like hunters along a migration path, striking at precise moments to maximize damage. The Luftwaffe doesn't need to chase. It simply waits where protection ends. For Allied planners, this escort gap becomes the single greatest obstacle to the daylight bombing campaign. Technology hasn't yet caught up with strategy. Factories producing engines, ball bearings, and oil refineries lie deep in the Reich, exactly where American fighters cannot yet follow. Each mission over Germany in late 1943 is therefore a grim gamble. Can the bombers endure hours of exposure to coordinated, experienced, and numerically superior German fighters? Can formations hold under relentless pressure long enough to drop their bombs and somehow claw their way home? For many crews, the answer is written in smoke trails and empty bunks. The escort gap is more than a geographic problem. It's a deadly timetable written in fuel gauges and flight ranges. Until the Allies find a fighter that can fly deep, fight hard, and bring its pilots home, the Luftwaffe will continue to control the heart of Europe's skies. Innovation doesn't always begin with a grand strategy. Sometimes, it starts with a simple request and an unexpected answer. In April 1940, as Europe burned and Britain braced for invasion, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation with a straightforward proposal: build more P-40 fighters under license. The British needed aircraft fast, and the P-40, though far from perfect, was at least available. But North America's President James Dutch Kindelberger had another idea. Instead of producing someone else's design, he offered to build an entirely new fighter from the ground up in just 120 days. It was a bold gamble, almost reckless, but Britain agreed. The result would change the course of the air war. Within months, the NA-73X prototype took to the skies. Sleek, low drag, and surprisingly fast at low altitudes, it was a marvel of rapid engineering. Its wing design, using a laminar flow profile that delayed airflow separation, reduced drag dramatically. It looked unlike anything else in the air. Yet, despite these promising beginnings, the aircraft suffered from one critical weakness: altitude performance. Early Mustangs used the American Allison engine, which gasped for breath above 15,000 feet. Over occupied Europe, bomber formations flew much higher. In those thin, icy altitudes, the new fighter couldn't keep up. So, while the Royal Air Force admired the Mustang's agility and range, they relegated it to low-level reconnaissance and ground attack. Then came an insight that would transform everything. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker took an Allison Mustang up for a flight. As he climbed through English skies, he was struck by how aerodynamically clean the aircraft felt. He later wrote that the Mustang's airframe was so good it simply needed the right engine to unleash its potential. That engine was already in British hands. The Merlin 61, a two-stage, supercharged powerhouse that gave the Spitfire its legendary high-altitude performance. Engineers at Rolls-Royce proposed marrying the Mustang's American airframe with this British heart. It was an unlikely collaboration, born of necessity, not planning, but it would create a legend. By October 1942, the first Merlin-powered Mustang roared down a British runway. Test pilots were stunned. Maximum speed leapt from 390 to over 440 miles per hour. Climb rates soared. High-altitude performance, once a weakness, became world-class. The transformation was immediate and undeniable. The Mustang had become something entirely new. Back in the United States, production ramped up at astonishing speed. The P-51B. The first operational Merlin-equipped version rolled off assembly lines by mid-1943. Its combination of range, speed, and agility was unprecedented. Where other fighters struggled to reach Germany, the Mustang promised to escort bombers all the way there and back. Colonel Kenneth Martin, who would soon command the Pioneer Mustang Group, recalled his first impression vividly. The moment the wheels left the runway, I knew this machine was different. It felt alive. It felt like it wanted to go places. For both American engineers and British allies, the Mustang represented something more than just another aircraft. It was proof that ingenuity and cooperation could solve what strategy alone could not. In an era defined by national rivalries and industrial competition, this fighter was a transatlantic hybrid, a union of British engine brilliance and American manufacturing might. In briefing rooms across England, planners began to see new possibilities. A fighter that could dive into the heart of Germany, protect the bombers over the target, and still return home safely. It sounded almost too good to be true. But the first Merlin Mustangs were already proving themselves in test flights. The numbers were clear, the performance undeniable. What remained was to put this new weapon into combat. Far away from the front lines, on factory floors in California and engine test stands in Derby, a quiet revolution had begun. The Luftwaffe didn't know it yet, but the days of uncontested skies over the Reich were numbered. The winter of 1943 brought a new sound to the skies over Europe, the sharp, confident snarl of Merlin engines. To the Luftwaffe, it was a sound they didn't yet recognize, but soon they would never forget it. In November, the 354th Fighter Group arrived at RAF Boxted in Essex, officially part of the U.S. 9th Air Force. Their real task was far more critical: to prove that the newly arrived P-51B Mustang could do what no Allied fighter had done before: escort bombers deep into Germany and return. The pilots had little time to adjust. Many had come straight from flying P-47 Thunderbolts, which felt heavy and sluggish compared to the Mustang's sleek responsiveness. Colonel Kenneth Martin, their commander, gave them a simple message: learn fast. The Luftwaffe wasn't going to give them a warm-up period. Their first mission came on December 1st, a fighter sweep over Belgium and France. It was uneventful, but the next flights would not be. A few days later, 16 Mustangs accompanied bombers on a short-range raid to Amiens. It wasn't a full escort, more of a combat trial. No German fighters appeared that day, but Allied air crews returned buzzing with excitement. The Mustang had climbed effortlessly, cruised swiftly, and still had fuel to spare. For the first time, bomber crews saw fighters overhead that wouldn't turn back halfway. On December 13th, history shifted. A long-range mission to Kiel, nearly 500 miles from base, marked the first time Allied fighters reached deep into territory previously considered untouchable. When German radar screens lit up with incoming formations, controllers prepared their usual trap, wait for the escorts to vanish, then strike. But this time, something was different. The escorts didn't vanish. German pilots climbing to intercept expected to meet unprotected bombers. Instead, they found aggressive American fighters already waiting for them. At first, many mistook the P-51s for P-47s. The silhouettes at distance were similar, and instinct told them the Americans couldn't possibly have followed the bombers this far. When the Mustangs kept coming, faster, higher, and unwilling to break off, confusion turned to alarm. Allied intelligence later intercepted frantic German radio chatter, controllers demanding confirmation of fighter types, pilots insisting they must be mistaken. In the cockpit, Mustang pilots were discovering the aircraft SIP's strengths firsthand. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan described his first combat flight simply, "It handled like a sports car. You could climb, dive, roll. It responded instantly. And the range, it felt like you could fly forever." In late December, missions intensified. On the 20th, Mustangs escorted bombers all the way to Bremen and back, shooting down several German fighters without loss. Each successful mission sent ripples through Luftwaffe command. Their long-held assumption that deep strikes would always arrive unescorted was crumbling for bomber crews. The psychological effect was immediate and profound. As formations droned toward targets, they looked up and saw Mustangs still flying beside them. Long after previous escorts would have turned for home, it was as if a door that had always been locked had suddenly opened. For the Luftwaffe, these early encounters were deeply unsettling. Their meticulously planned interception strategies depended on predictable escort limits. Now, suddenly, the enemy was rewriting the rules mid-war, and the pilots doing it were flying machines faster, more agile, and able to fight on equal terms even deep inside German airspace. The winter skies of 1943 had become a proving ground. The Mustang wasn't yet fielded in overwhelming numbers, but its presence was a warning. A new chapter in the air war had begun, one that would end the era of German aerial invincibility. March 4th, 1944. High above Brandenburg, the clouds are thin and scattered. Through gaps in the haze, the unmistakable sprawl of Berlin stretches out below, the heart of the Third Reich, a city Hermann Göring once swore would never see enemy aircraft. On this morning, 660 American bombers fly in flawless formation toward the German capital. Engines drone like a massive steel tide rolling eastward. But what shocks German radar operators isn't the size of the incoming raid, it's what surrounds it. Squadrons of single-engine fighters weaving protective patterns around the bombers, Mustangs. For Luftwaffe pilots scrambling from their airfields, disbelief gives way to a grim realization. Allied fighters, once bound by strict range limits, have crossed an invisible threshold. They are no longer skirting the edges of the Reich. They are here, over Berlin itself. Colonel Donald Blakesley leads the 4th Fighter Group on this historic mission. Just days earlier, his squadrons had traded in their P-47 Thunderbolts for sleek, long-legged P-51 Brez. There's no time for extended training. 4 days later, they are escorting bombers to the capital of Nazi Germany. Blakesley's pilots know what's at stake. This isn't just another mission, it's a demonstration to the Luftwaffe that nowhere is safe anymore. As the bomber stream nears Berlin, German controllers flood the airwaves with attack orders. Over 200 Luftwaffe fighters scramble, racing upward to meet the intruders. But today, the bombers are not alone. Mustang pilots dive ahead of the formation, meeting the defenders head-on. The clash is sudden and brutal. German pilots expect tired, fuel-limited escorts that will peel away after a brief skirmish. Instead, they face fresh, aggressive fighters with altitude advantage and time to spare. Dogfights erupt in scattered pockets across the sky. Engines scream, contrails twist into spirals, and tracer rounds carve through the freezing air. The 4th Fighter Group claims 15 victories that day. More importantly, they break up multiple Luftwaffe attack runs before the bombers are ever seriously threatened. The psychological effect is immediate. For the first time, German defenders find themselves fighting deep over their own territory while running low on fuel, facing opponents who seem tireless. Back on the ground, Luftwaffe officers confront a terrifying new reality. Their entire defensive strategy has been built on the assumption of sanctuary, that central Germany lay beyond the reach of Allied escorts. Training schools, assembly plants, and supply depots were deliberately placed in these supposedly safe zones. That sanctuary has just evaporated. Major Klaus Mitschke, a German commander, reportedly returned from that mission shaken. After Mustangs pursued his unit all the way back to their landing pattern, he told his pilots, "The air war has changed. Our skies are no longer ours." For American bomber crews, this mission is more than a tactical milestone. It's emotional vindication. Months of flying into Germany without adequate protection have taken a grim toll. Watching Mustangs accompany them all the way to Berlin and back feels like witnessing history turn mid-flight. Strategically, this mission is a seismic shift. If Berlin, the geographic and symbolic center of Nazi power, can be reached under full fighter escort, no target is beyond Allied reach. German commanders understand the implications instantly. Industrial facilities once considered untouchable will now face regular raids. Fighter bases far from the front lines will no longer offer safety. This single mission is not the end of the Luftwaffe, but it is the moment their dominance begins to unravel irreversibly. The hunters have found hunters waiting for them, even above their own capital. The myth of German airspace as an impregnable fortress shatters on that cold March morning. And with it, the Luftwaffe loses something. It cannot replace the psychological high ground. By the spring of 1944, the air war over Europe no longer resembled the desperate defensive struggle of the previous year. It had become an offensive machine, relentless, calculated, and fueled by the range of the P-51 Mustang. Between February 20th and 25th, the Allies launched Operation Argument, later known as Big Week. It was the first large-scale demonstration of what the Mustang truly made possible. In 6 days, the 8th Air Force and RAF Bomber Command struck deep into the heart of Germany's aircraft production network, factories, assembly lines, and repair depots. But this time, the bombers were never alone. P-51 squadrons escorted formations on every major raid, fighting their way in, over, and out of German airspace. Luftwaffe fighters, forced to respond, bled pilots and planes at a rate they could not sustain. The balance of attrition shifted. General James Doolittle, newly in command of the 8th Air Force, issued a revolutionary directive in January 1944. Allied fighters were no longer to stick close to the bombers. Instead, they were to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found. Once bombers dropped their payloads, Mustang squadrons dove away, hunting enemy fighters on airfields, in transit, or mid-climb. What had once been a defensive escort mission had transformed into an aggressive aerial campaign aimed at breaking the Luftwaffe's backbone. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group described the shift bluntly. "We said it'd see the bombers off, then go looking for trouble, strafing airfields, catching fighters landing or taking off. It wasn't sipped about survival anymore. It was about wiping them out." The results were immediate and devastating. In January, the Luftwaffe lost 1,300 pilots. In February, over 2,100. In March, another 2,100. These weren't just numbers. They represented the core of Germany's experienced airmen, many with years of combat knowledge. They were irreplaceable. American losses were real, but sustainable. Industrial might and massive training programs produced more than 11,000 new pilots each month. For Germany, each loss was a wound that could not heal. Training programs were cut, fuel was scarce, and new pilots arrived with barely a fraction of the flight hours needed to survive against Mustang veterans. Technological superiority widened the gap further. In late 1944, the K-14 computing gun sight gave Mustang pilots a decisive advantage in deflection shooting. Its gyroscopic system calculated lead automatically based on target speed and turn rate. In extended dogfights, American pilots could fire longer and more accurately. The P-51 carried nearly 1,900 rounds for its 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, about 30 seconds of continuous fire. German cannon-armed fighters often carried ammunition for less than 10 seconds. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's SIP's top aces, recognized the problem clearly. The Mustang wasn't just a fighter. It was a complete weapon system. We had excellent aircraft, but nothing that brought all elements together so effectively. Behind these tactical and technological shifts lay human cost on an immense scale. Thousands of young men, many barely out of training, were thrown into the frozen skies at 25,000 feet. Combat lasted seconds. Survival depended on experience few German rookies possessed. American pilots were far from invulnerable, but they had the numbers, the machines, and increasingly, the initiative. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt. Sturmgruppen were formed. Units of heavily armored FW-190 SEs designed to punch through Mustang screens and get close to bomber formations. But these lumbering attackers became easy prey for nimble P-51 SEs. Massed attacks failed too. The Allies simply fielded more aircraft with superior coordination. Every German response was met by an Allied counter, faster and more effective. It was a war of speed, production, and adaptation, and Germany was falling behind on every front. By the end of Big Week, the statistics were stark. Over 3,300 bomber sorties, 3,600 fighter sorties, 226 bombers lost, but more than 500 German fighters destroyed. Even more crippling were the pilot casualties. The Luftwaffe's operational structure was cracking under relentless pressure. What the P-51 enabled wasn't merely protection, it was transformation. The air war shifted from defending bombers to dismantling the enemy air force itself. For the first time, the Allies weren't reacting to German strategy. They were dictating the terms of the conflict, forcing the Luftwaffe to respond on their schedule, over their targets, and under their escort. The tide had turned, not with a single battle, but through a systematic campaign made possible by range, speed, and sheer industrial momentum. The Mustang wasn't just flying escort, it was leading a revolution in aerial warfare. By mid-1944, the air war was no longer defined solely by technology or strategy. It was defined by exhaustion, fear, and the slow erosion of the Luftwaffe's spirit. The pilots who had laughed at unescorted bombers the previous year now climbed into their cockpits with resignation in their eyes. The Mustang was not just defeating aircraft, it was breaking morale. Every mission began with the same grim ritual, a silent acknowledgement that many would not return. Letters home, preserved in archives despite censorship, reveal the shift in tone. Early war enthusiasm and bravado had been replaced by fatalism. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We take off, knowing most of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, above us, around us, with more fuel, more ammunition. It seeps like fighting the wind." The psychological pressure was relentless. Mustangs roamed deep into German territory, circling airfields like predators, waiting for fighters to take off or return low on fuel. Pilots who managed to survive combat still faced the terror of landing under the watchful eyes of enemy fighters overhead. Walter Schuck of JG-7 recalled bitterly, "In 1943, we were knights of the air. By 1944, we were prey. Mustangs followed us home, waited above our bases. There was no safety anymore. For many young German pilots, the skies had become a death sentence. Training programs, crippled by fuel shortages, produced men with barely 50 hours of flight time, nowhere near enough to match Allied veterans. They entered combat terrified and unprepared, facing opponents with superior machines, tactics, and overwhelming numbers. The Luftwaffe's leadership tried to project confidence, but their pilots knew the truth. Operational losses climbed while victories plummeted. Average flight hours before death or capture fell from over 250 in 1943 to less than 80 by late 1944, and often under 50 in the war's final months. The experience gap widened into a chasm. Meanwhile, Mustang pilots experienced a different psychological journey. Their missions were long, grueling, and often physically punishing. 6 hours on oxygen at high altitude left their throats dry, muscles cramped, and senses dulled. Yet they flew with growing confidence. Lieutenant Robert Powell described it vividly. Your neck aches from scanning the skies. Your mouth turns to cotton from the oxygen. But knowing you can stay with the bombers, fight the enemy, and still make it home, that makes the pain worth it. The Luftwaffe tried to counter the psychological blow with propaganda, painting the Mustang as overrated and vulnerable. But such narratives collapsed the moment pilots looked skyward and saw their reality. American fighters appearing where none should be, staying longer than logic allowed, fighting with a ferocity that didn't wane. Captured German diaries show a recurring theme: disbelief giving way to despair. Pilots had been taught that Germany possessed unmatched technological prowess, that Americans were soft and incapable of sustained warfare. The Mustang shattered these illusions. One Luftwaffe officer confided, "We thought they would run out of fighters before reaching us. Instead, they brought more fighters than we had planes. Everything we believed about the enemy was wrong." The collapse wasn't just individual, it was systemic. Commanders struggled to rotate exhausted units. Training pipelines broke under the strain of fuel shortages and bombing. Airfields, once considered safe, became death traps. The mental strain radiated downward, affecting ground crews, controllers, and anti-aircraft units. The once proud Luftwaffe, a force that had dominated European skies in 1940 and 1941, was mentally unraveling. This psychological implosion accelerated in the summer of 1944, as Mustangs extended their reach to strategic targets like oil refineries and transportation hubs. German pilots were forced to defend a crumbling infrastructure. Each mission felt less like defense and more like a delaying action against the inevitable. Many Luftwaffe veterans later pointed not to a single battle, but to this period of mounting hopelessness as the true breaking point. Tactically, they continued to fight fiercely, but strategically, they understood they were facing an opponent whose strength grew daily, while theirs diminished with every sortie. The Mustang was not just a machine, it was a symbol of Allied inevitability. Its presence in the skies signaled to German pilots that they were no longer the hunters. They were outnumbered, outproduced, and increasingly out of hope. By mid-1944, the Mustang had become more than a fighter plane. It was a symbol of Allied industrial might, of German overreach, and of the irreversible shift in the skies over Europe. The Luftwaffe's defeat didn't come from a single dogfight or dramatic battle. It came through strangulation, a slow, methodical crushing of fuel, infrastructure, and spirit. Germany's war machine depended on synthetic oil. Facilities at Luna, Politz, and Brix produced the aviation fuel that kept fighters airborne. For years, these plants were considered untouchable, too deep inside the Reich for escorted bombers to reach. That changed with the Mustang. By the summer of 1944, P-51s were escorting heavy bombers all the way to these critical targets and back again. Repeated precision raids, now shielded by aggressive fighter screens, systematically dismantled German fuel production. The results were catastrophic. Aviation fuel output plummeted from 175,000 tons in April to just 30,000 tons by July. By September, the figure dropped again to a mere 10,000 tons. Training flights were slashed, then canceled entirely. Aircraft sat idle for lack of fuel. Even the revolutionary Me-262 jet squadrons, capable of stunning speed, often remained grounded. Johannes Steinhoff later described watching the jets sit powerless on runways while Mustangs prowled overhead. "We had the fastest fighter in the world and no fuel to fly it. I watched helplessly as Mustangs circled above, untouchable. The Luftwaffe's arteries had been severed, and the Mustang had made it possible." With fuel dwindling and the Allied bombing campaign reaching every corner of the Reich, German airfields themselves became killing grounds. Mustang pilots learned to loiter near bases, waiting for fighters to take off or land. Even the most advanced German jets were vulnerable during these moments. On October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Urban Drew caught two Me-262s in their landing pattern. Throttles pulled back and tanks nearly empty. He dove, struck fast, and destroyed them before they could react. Encounters like this were repeated across Germany, swift, merciless, and emblematic of a war that Germany no longer controlled. By early 1945, arithmetic had become impossible for the Luftwaffe. The U.S. had produced over 15,000 Mustangs, with thousands operating in Europe. The Luftwaffe could field only a few hundred serviceable fighters at any time, many piloted by teenagers with minimal training. Fuel shortages meant even these planes flew rarely. Kill ratios soared in the Allies' favor, sometimes 10-1. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer summarized the situation bluntly. By 1945, it wasn't set combat anymore. It was execution. June 6, 1944, D-Day, made the Luftwaffe's decline visible to the world. Over the invasion beaches, the Allies flew nearly 15,000 sorties. The Luftwaffe managed just over 300. Only 2 German fighters appeared over Sword Beach. They made a single strafing pass and vanished into history. By spring 1945, the once feared Luftwaffe had ceased to function as a fighting force. The few remaining aircraft were scattered, fuel-starved, and flown by boys who'd trained more in classrooms than cockpits. Mustang squadrons roamed the skies virtually unopposed, striking airfields, trains, convoys, and whatever remnants of German industry were left standing. The collapse was not gradual. It was sudden and total. In 1943, the Luftwaffe ruled the skies. By early 1944, it was bleeding. By 1945, it was gone. After the war, Luftwaffe veterans spoke with striking unanimity about the turning point. It wasn't Normandy. It wasn't Berlin's fall. It was the day they saw Mustangs escorting bombers deep inside Germany. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's SEP's top aces, wrote, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter of the war. Until it arrived, we controlled the tempo of the air battle. After it arrived, we never regained the initiative." Others were even more blunt. Heinz Noke put it simply, "The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe. Not the invasion, not the bombers, that fighter." For many, the Mustang became the embodiment of American problem-solving power, a weapon born from necessity, refined through cooperation with Britain, and produced on a scale Germany could not match. The psychological effect of the Mustang lingered long after the last contrails faded. Young Luftwaffe pilots, raised on propaganda of German superiority, faced a devastating collision with reality. They expected Americans to be weak, technologically inferior, and incapable of sustained warfare. Instead, they found a nation capable of out-innovating and out-producing them, and doing so with speed that shattered every assumption. When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost, not eventually, but already. By the war's end, Germany's skies were no longer battlegrounds. They were Allied airspace. Trains, roads, and factories lay in ruins. Oil fields smoldered, airfields stood silent, their runways cratered, their planes abandoned. The P-51 Mustang's impact extended far beyond victory. Its range and versatility rewrote military doctrine. Before the Mustang, fighters were seen as short-range defenders. After the Mustang, they were strategic tools capable of projecting power deep into enemy territory. This principle shaped the jet age and the Cold War, influencing designs from the F-86 Sabre to modern multi-role fighters. But its legacy is also human. The Mustang didn't just win dogfights, it changed the fate of nations. It turned the tide of the air war, made D-Day possible, and shortened the conflict by months, perhaps years. At a 1985 reunion in Texas, American and German veterans raised glasses together. Colonel Bud Anderson, who flew 116 Mustang combat missions, toasted his former enemies. "We had great planes, great pilots, and home advantage. But you had the Mustang, and that made all the difference." Former Luftwaffe ace Walter Schuck nodded, adding with a wry smile, "We went from laughing at your bombers to hiding from your Mustangs in 4 months. No one has ever seen a reversal like that." The story of the Mustang is the story of how industrial strength, technological innovation, and strategic insight combined to break an enemy that once seemed unstoppable. By 1945, German skies belonged not to the Luftwaffe, but to the P-51. It silenced the laughter of 1943 and replaced it with the quiet of abandoned airfields and shattered illusions. Its legacy endures in aviation history, in military strategy, and in the memories of those who watched the balance of power shift, mile by mile, wingtip by wingtip,